Hello, Internet, and welcome back to another episode of Meet La Prensa. Viewer, if you like what you see here, if you find value, please hit like and subscribe. It really helps us grow. Now, the thing I wanted to talk to you a little bit about this morning is how Republicans are wasting the most precious thing that Democrats have right now in Washington, and that's time. Now, as most of you know, back in November, Democrats won both the House and the presidency in November's election. Now, in January, Democrats also won the Senate during the special election on January 6th in Georgia that brought Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock to the Senate, giving Democrats and Republicans basically an even split in the Senate. And obviously with Democrats controlling the White House, Kamala Harris is the tie-breaking vote for any legislation going through the Senate. But yet still the Democratic agenda that Joe Biden has pushed, the Democratic agenda that progressives are pushing in Congress continues to be obstructed. Now, this seems really weird to a lot of people because, you know, Democrats are in charge. They're in charge of the House. In essence, they're in charge of the Senate, and they're certainly in charge of the White House. And yet it doesn't seem like anything's really getting done in Congress. The White House has moved unilaterally on a lot of issues where they do have leeway. For example, immigration. In my humble opinion, despite a lot of hiccups, the Biden administration has operated in good faith to enact as many progressive policies as they unilaterally can. Now, there are some things, as Karina pointed out with some of the guests that she's interviewed lately, like Title 42, that they for some reason haven't just unilaterally rolled back. A lot of people think they should. I think they should, but they haven't. Now, in Congress, on the other hand, we have obstructionists once again within the Democratic Party, like Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, that are torpedoing the agenda. Now, this happened before. When I first got to Washington, D.C. back in 2009, there were obstructionists like Max Baucus, to some degree Claire McCaskill, who basically torpedoed things like the single-payer mandate for Obamacare. Now these obstructionists are Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema. Now, the way that these senators, these presumably Democrat senators, have been acting and have been operating is, if anything, in bad faith. Like they behave on some level like Republicans, like HR1, SR1, the bill, the voting rights bill, the bill that would help fight these state legislatures that are making it so that Latinos and Black people and other peoples of color can't vote, right, as easily as white people. This is what Republicans, this is all part of the Republican agenda. Democrats had written a bill to kind of roll that back. And yet, for some reason, Sinema and Manchin blocked it. Like they decided that they weren't interested in having voting rights for minorities. And it was like, what? Are you serious? So that was one big time waste. The Democratic leadership had spent all this time putting together as many votes as they could for this, only to find their own party torpedo this legislation. Now, this is going to cost them in the midterm. And I think that the midterm is something that everyone should be looking at, but it seems like right now only Republicans are looking at it. So what is the midterm election? The midterm election is the election that happens between the presidential elections. Presidential elections in this country are every 4 years. The midterm election comes every 2 years. Now, the midterm election typically focuses on Congress. So every member of the House of Representatives is up for a re-election, and like a third of the Senate is up for re-election. And everybody's looking at the midterm on the Republican side and saying, if we can just get to the midterm without these Democratic agenda items being passed, then they won't get to pass them because Republicans are going to be back in power. That's what they're banking on. That's what Republicans are banking on. And Democrats, in my opinion, aren't putting up the kind of fight that inspires any kind of confidence that they're going to be able to maintain their majorities in the midterm. Now, I think a really important thing to note here is the dichotomy between the national government and the state legislatures. Now, in the national government, Democrats lead. They lead both houses and the White House. But in state legislatures, Republicans lead. And I think that there's a big difference here between how Republicans lead when it comes to policy and how Democrats lead when it comes to policy. When Democrats have the majorities, they, you know, in so many words, tend to shit the bed, you know, to borrow a phrase. They will obstruct their own agenda, trip over their own dicks, and end up with nothing at the end of it. Like, who's really happy at the end of the day about Obamacare? It cost President Obama all of his political capital for 8 years, Obamacare did, but it hasn't helped me at all, like at all, since the day it was passed. So we didn't get immigration reform under Obama. We didn't get hardly anything under Obama. And then Trump comes to power. And what happens? Tax cuts for the super rich under the promise of creating jobs, even though it never created any jobs. All these different horrible agenda items that Mitch McConnell was able to ram through. 280 plus judges ram through that they denied President Obama in his last term, right? So that's what happens in the national government. Now, if you go down to the state government, Republicans are just pushing bill after bill after bill to prevent Black people from voting, especially Black people from voting. And one of the things that they're finding now is that, you know, as much as Democrats assumed that they were going to be able to rely on the Latino vote right? They're finding that Latinos are starting to sway Republican too. So it's hard to make the argument at this point that Democrats are doing anything right in the legislatures, both the national legislature, which is our Congress, and state legislatures throughout the country. Now, the White House seems to be doing everything it possibly can to enact the agenda that President Joe Biden promised would be enacted if he was elected president. Even some of these items that seemed like pipe dreams to progressive, like a moratorium on deportations, he has, in good faith, executed them to the best of his abilities, right? But again, like the problem continues to be the legislatures. Like we talk this huge game about about Charles Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, the leaders of the Democratic Party. But what are they actually doing? They have 2 years now where they have majorities in both the House and Senate, right? And I don't think that anybody truly believes that Democrats are going to maintain these majorities after the midterm, right? Republicans are playing a midterm game. Nobody knows what game Democrats are playing at this point, right? Like Schumer can't whip his own caucus. He can't whip votes in his own caucus, right? Like he can't get Sinema. He can't get Manchin. There's always defectors, whereas when Mitch McConnell was the majority leader, he didn't have these kind of defections that Schumer always has. Pelosi, on the other hand, this doesn't look like the House she's going to be able to keep the House. It just doesn't look that way. So the question is like, what are Democrats doing? Like, if you're a Democrat voter, are you happy with the way the Democratic Party is governing in Congress? Because it seems right now that, a lot of Democrats would rather be Republicans. So I think ultimately, the most important thing any of us have on this earth is time. We all have the same number of seconds, minutes, and hours in a day. And Americans as voters, we all have the exact same minutes of seconds, hours, days, and months within a legislative cycle, right? Which is 2 years in Congress. We're in the 117th legislative cycle right now for the United States Congress. That means 117 times Congress has formed, gathered to rule, right? And this 117th Congress looks just like the 116th Congress to me, just like the 115th Congress to me, where Republicans are flexing and Democrats are running away. So it's sad. It's sad to see this gridlock because ultimately the American people do deserve better. They deserve that our tax dollars go to a Congress to be spent in ways that make sense for us. But that hasn't been the case for over a decade. And it doesn't seem to be the case now. And I think it's going to cost Democrats huge in the midterm. And when Republicans are back in power in Congress, the White House is going to have even less of an opportunity to enact its progressive agenda. So if you're a progressive right now, it looks pretty hopeless for you. The future looks pretty bleak. I don't have any guidance on like what you could do to move forward. But if you're a Republican right now, it seems to me like the best thing you can do is just keep doing what you're doing. Paint the left as Antifa and socialist and communist or whatever, which is total bullshit. But Republicans eat it up, especially these evangelicals. And then just wait, obstruct, and wait. Don't let anything pass. That seems to be their agenda. And unfortunately, Democrats have no prescription for that agenda. So it looks pretty bleak, I'd say, from a Washington perspective. Like, you know what I mean? Like infrastructure, of course, infrastructure is going to pass because Congress loves spending money. And there's a lot of money to be spent in infrastructure, but that they didn't pass voting rights, that they're not going to pass immigration, that they can't even pass like an anti-sex sexual assault bill, a sexual assault prevention bill for the military. They can't do anything. Or they won't do anything. You know what I mean? And a lot of it comes from the lack of leadership from Senator Charles Schumer. I hate to say it. If he can't whip his Senate votes, then he's not really a majority leader. He's just the majority guy. So that's it for me today. I hope this message finds you well. Thank you. Let us know what you think of this monologue. Please like and subscribe. And that's a wrap.